Welcome to Trauma, Psychedelics, and Buddhism with Karen Sprinkle, certified psychedelic guide, trauma therapist, and author of The Thriving Self. Drawing from over 30 years of experience in trauma therapy, embodied Buddhist practice, and immersive Eastern living, Karen explores the many paths to healing through conversation with Dharma teachers, scientists, and mental health professionals. Listen in and discover new ways of thinking about what it means to truly heal and to thrive.
Hi, Jake. There you are.
Karen,
Oh, you look rather handsome today.
I had to dress the part. I'm talking to you, a trained professional.
Indeed.
Yeah,
You
I'm
look
really excited. I'm really excited to share with you today what I think I know about things.
This is beautiful. Oh my gosh, Jake, look at you. You have my book behind you. How sweet is that?
Oh, I hadn't noticed. I got ugly man. I got ugly man back there too.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love it. Surrounded by all of your plants. It's amazing.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm really excited about joining you today. I put some thought into it too, so I think we'll have a meaningful discussion about what I know. But I'm not a trained professional. I'm not a doctor. I just can give you my observations and what I know people have truly told me about their experiences.
That's right.
And some of them haven't been favorable, and some of them have.
That's right. That's exactly why I wanted to interview you. And I'm going to go ahead, since we're already recording, I'm going to introduce you
Okay, please.
formally so the audience knows how you're a trained human being in this field.
I've been around a while, and that shows up on the hair, my color of my hair. So yeah, if you've lasted this long, you've been around.
You've been around. You've certainly been around, and you have great expertise. So let me tell the viewers a little bit about who Jake Dimmock is, okay? So Jake is here today to talk to us about cannabis as an elixir or as an interferer on the path to healing. Jake Dimmock, originally from Norfolk, Virginia, has lived in Seattle, Washington since 1993. He spent much of his adult life as a U.S. merchant seaman, working aboard tugboats on both the East Coast, with New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and the West Coast, including Seattle, Canada, California, meeting a wide variety of people along the way. Driven by a deep passion for the medicinal potential of cannabis, Jake went on to co-found one of the first medical marijuana dispensaries in the country, the Northwest Patient Resource Center in Seattle, Washington. Throughout this work, Jake quickly realized that growing and providing cannabis to patients involved more than simply selling pot. His perspective on recreational use also expanded as he saw how cannabis could be more beneficial to some people than the narrow notion of just getting high. Jake will share what he learned about the mental health benefits of cannabis, particularly for those living with PTSD. While anecdotal studies suggest cannabis can help some people, he emphasizes that not every treatment works for everyone. He will also explore the complex role cannabis plays in dreaming, how it can disrupt or suppress dreams, making it difficult to remember them, and how this can both alleviate nightmares for some individuals with PTSD, while also potentially interfering with healing for others. Jake, this is so much wisdom.
Well, I think that pretty much sums it up too, Karen. Maybe some other, items that we can discuss, but yes, I didn't start off so much as being somebody that wanted to serve cannabis patients, is what we called them, even though I think doctors would laugh at the notion that we called them patients. They were patients, but not our patients. But that's what we refer to them in the cannabis industry. And back then it was kind of new. So nobody really knew about a lot of it. It was an illegal substance, but certain cities, I think Seattle and certainly Colorado too, were Denver and those bigger cities were able to have other, means of getting it legalized, which became somewhat tolerated in our cities, but we still were selling marijuana under the threat of the DEA knocking down their door at any time. So I don't even know if it could be done in today's environment. But here in our city, we were able to work with city legislators and such to get licenses to sell medical cannabis. And people would go to their doctor or neuropath and would get a written authorization, not a prescription because it wasn't a scheduled drug. So an authorization you get from your doctor saying, yes, we think it's a good idea that you try cannabis for this. So doctors were somewhat giving us permission in some way to sell cannabis to their patients. And so we had a wide variety of cannabis that came in from all kinds of sources, unregulated sources. So we didn't really know what we had as far as, was it safe to smoke? Was it sprayed with pesticide and insecticide? So we had to look at things, and it was much more hands-on to us than it is maybe today, where you look at a package, which now it's evolved to. So we were making those judgments, and then more and more it became popular, and more people were getting their authorization to use cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
Those people were not necessarily the stoner people, that they were there too. But surprisingly, early on, we found that there were a lot of blue-haired old ladies and blue-haired old men that were coming in with real ailments and needed help with things like sleep. They needed help with pain. They needed help with their anxiety. They needed, other things became more prominent later on as some of the, people that do suffer, real suffer with PTSD. They would come in and have, their doctor maybe recommended to them because they had a doctor's authorization to use cannabis. And we had to help them sort through the different varieties of cannabis that were available as to what might work best for them. We really didn't know, we kind of knew what the effects of some cannabis were. We knew that there was cannabis indica, which is associated with a much more sedative, called couch lock, I think, by some in the stoner community. In the couch is how you would remember that indica was one that would be good for relaxation, perhaps sleep. And then sativa was another type of cannabis that was much more uplifting, maybe much more enlightening to some, maybe the one you'd want to go to the concert for, the one that would keep you up and lively. So these two things, very rudimentary, and there was no distinction but other than what effect it gave us or our peers, our bud tending peers. We'd all sample it, we'd all have some idea. And that's how we began advising people about, I think this would be good for you. In reality, oftentimes it was, what kind of mood are you in when you started smoking pot? What are you looking for? If it was for, changing your mood and behavior so you weren't depressed or you weren't anxious, sometimes I kind of thought later on, I knew that I wouldn't recommend any cannabis for you. I wouldn't recommend you smoke anything. It elevates your blood pressure, constricts your arteries. I mean, there was other things that we learned along the way that, we're giving some of these people advice about things we don't really know other than our own personal experience. And then as you draw from other people's experience, other, hundreds of people coming and talking about their experience with this, whatever, you would have some better idea to their peers is what might work for them. But again, it was always stressed to the patients, this is an individual experience for everyone. We never want to take that responsibility. Say, oh yeah, try this. This will work.
Yeah.
I know that I developed, especially with, I had a pretty unique situation because I was the oldest person in the community serving cannabis as a bud tender. And that
Oh,
developed into me owning the business and everything. But that, from the very beginning, I was the one that they would want to come talk to because I was the one they felt like, not some young kid with a, pierced earring or any of those things that they stereotypically would figure. And I don't want to get advice from this kid that doesn't know anything. I'd
yeah.
rather get advice from Jake. And so they coined me very early on, especially the kids that worked in the shop. I call them all kids because they were always younger, 20s and 30 years old. And I'm, at this time, 55 and 60-year-old working at the pot shop selling weed with them. And
Uh-huh.
they would coin me as Jake the Professor because that's, and that became my Instagram account too. I realized back in the day too, you could get some reach, certainly bringing people into your store, but also with offering information through Instagram. And so I became Jake the Professor. I haven't posted forever, but it was a fun side project. And I was the owner of the store, so I could do what I wanted to
Oh,
with maybe with the intention of bringing other cannabis patients in or just come on down. So it was kind of fun at the beginning, but then it became quite serious to us that we were really helping people with some of their mental health thresholds. Oftentimes it might be something as, sleep. And then I'll go on, but I'll tell you, and then CBD became a real popular thing. And now CBD, they sell at your local drugstore, 7-Eleven, you can buy CBD. And this was kind of this taboo little thing that we first were introduced to that. And this became popular immediately with some of the older patients who didn't necessarily want to feel altered. They didn't want that. They wanted some of the pain relieving effects that some cannabis offered for some people. And
Mhm.
I would tell them all that my experience is other people have told me. I've got other
Yeah.
people, old ladies coming in here and telling me that this worked for them. They're, oh, look, I drove today in myself. I didn't have any arthritis. So these were some of the testimonies I heard from real people in my community who I kind of knew that they were telling me the truth. So I was able to speak that to others. I knew that I heard this from this woman. I believe her. I'm telling you to believe me that I heard her. And they would experiment themselves with, smaller doses. And, it became something more than I knew it would be, to the point after it became legal, it no longer was fun or a challenge. And then everybody became an expert then. So, during the early days, it was more too than just, selling cannabis, what we call medical marijuana, but too was the activism involved with getting it legal. That too was very much in the back burner of everything we were doing. Was also going down to Olympia, Washington, telling our legislators, look, I'm telling them much what I'm telling you today. We talk to people all the time. They're feeling better, and they knew it too, but pushing that to legalization was somewhat of a trick. And I, on the shoulders of others, I stand as far as my part of that. But there was others much more involved with the activism than I was. I was much more hands-on with the people who were using the cannabis and coming in to buy it. And then it became, again, legalized, and it became much more commercial, somewhat
Mhm.
like 7-Eleven. Everything had a SKU. Everything had a fancy name, maybe some kind of decorative packaging that would attract people into buying that particular type of cannabis that might not have anything to do with their issues that they're trying to work with. And not everybody was working with issues either. Some people simply just want to get high. So that too couldn't be ignored.
Sure.
But with that said, it was something too that fought alcoholism, and close to my heart, because
Mm.
my father was an alcoholic, and I never ever I never got involved with alcohol. Even as a young kid, I got sick and I never liked it. So pot was somewhat, even my mother tolerated me using pot at a young age. It was okay if I stayed at home and smoked pot and blew it out the window, but I wasn't to go out and drinking. So that became, and because my father was an alcoholic, and she warned me forever, don't do that. So
Mm.
it became something that was almost authorized from my own mother. He said, okay, well, that's okay. Don't do that. So even growing up, I never felt anything was wrong with using pot. I knew that don't get caught with it or you get in trouble. But I knew there was
Yeah.
morally, there was nothing wrong with me using or smoking it. But treating alcoholism, people would come in and they're struggling with alcoholism. Cannabis worked very well if you could really offer them the suggestion that this is maybe a good alternative for them.
Mm.
Alcoholism is another demon, but we would certainly try to help somebody, guide them through. And oddly enough, people would treat their bud tender like their therapist, quite frankly. And that
Well,
too
I could only imagine. Yeah.
that was much more than we were even able to comprehend, that these people are really trusting us. So that you would know, lays a heavy responsibility on me giving you advice. So always with the caveat, this may not be works for you, but we'll try something else. And maybe cannabis isn't even for you. Maybe
Right.
this is something
Exactly. Yeah.
you can try it, and you can. Oftentimes, it got down to maybe even gummies, or certainly what now is a commonplace. But back then, introducing somebody who wasn't sure about cannabis, but introducing them to small micro doses of gummy bears or the things that were popular today, became real beneficial for some of their problems. Another big one that would come up all the time: sleep. Sleep
Sure.
deprivation. So nothing helps better than a 10 milligram dose of cannabis.
Oh, indeed.
If you
Yes.
want a good night's sleep. But that's, good night. And of course, that gets into, sleep is real important for your mental health. So all of that played into it, but none of it was a one fix. Oh, try this. This is going to fix your problems. There's no one fix for all of it.
Jake, if you don't mind just a pause
Yeah.
for, especially for our viewers and our
Yeah.
listeners, we know it's more mainstream now, and we know the difference between indica and sativa and CBD, but not everyone. So before you continue, I'm wondering, can you just give a brief little
Mhm.
overview of what CBD versus sativa and indica is for
I
people who
can.
do not know?
Well, I can. In fact, I think too, introduced probably around 2014 from San Francisco, California, was a strain called Harlequin. Harlequin was non-psychoactive, but it gave you a somewhat of a mild euphoric effect without that heavy, maybe narcotic effect I'll use for this discussion that people associated with smoking pot. But it also maybe not only elevated your mood in some way, but some people were now making salves and tinctures out of CBD. And CBD is another type of cannabis, usually found in, say, hemp. Industrial hemp has measures of CBD. Even what we know as pot has a measure of CBD. But some strains have a high measure, a high dose of CBD, and not very much THC, the known active ingredient of that psychoactive effect that we associate with cannabis is from THC. CBD, a non-psychoactive component of cannabis, offered other relief to people that became quite popular. And so, man, back in the day, we were now kind of issued a kind of a, we have to now introduce people to a whole new concept of cannabis use, and that's non-psychoactive cannabis. And that became quite popular too, and still is today. Again, you can find CBD in the local, your local market.
Yeah.
So that was, it was more than just selling pot. It was, and it still is for many, a lot of, even today, your bud tender is your friend. He's the one that's going to guide you to that weekend of euphoria. And that is still today. If you go into the pot shop, I want to talk to my guy. I want to talk to my bud tender. Is he here? And they watch the bud tenders. Even now, your customer will watch your schedule so they can go see you because they trust you to give them that advice. Big responsibility for some kid that's 25 years old that's now giving granny advice about what pot she should use. So again, it's developed into a bigger industry than what we even kind of imagined. Yeah, it's evolved quite a bit, but go ahead. I ramble.
Oh, no, this is amazing because eventually we'll get into the different strains, but maybe for the viewers, you can talk about indica versus like, how does that happen? Like, how does it even happen? Is it like a different plant? Is it contracted a different way? Like, how does that,
Well,
you know so much about the process?
well, a good question. So indica generally, so cannabis grows all over the world, and it grows as industrial hemp, that we've heard about forever. It grows in China. It grows all over the world, but specifically, indica came from the Hindu Kush region of the country, of the world, in the Netherlands, where there was a shorter grow cycle because of the colder months and such. They had a shorter grow cycle, and the plants themselves genetically engineered themselves to even grow shorter, much more dense, and much more narcotic in effect. It was known as couch lop. In the couch is the term I spoke of. Much more sedative is the pot that originally from the Hindu Kush region. Sativas, on the other hand, was much more uplifting when you smoked. It had a different fragrance, much like roses even have a different fragrance. If you smell one rose, it smells slightly different than the other rose. Still, one's white, one's red. So just like any other plant, it develops genetically into different forms of itself. Strains is the term. And so sativa would be, generally speaking, for some people, much more energetic. It'd be the thing you vacuum the carpet with. This was their house cleaning strain, if that's what you're into for the day. And so that originates, say, from South America, the sativa strain, Mexico, Jamaica. So all these, back in the day when I was in high school, there was Jamaican weed, and there was Mexican, there was certainly Colombian weed, and all these different strains back then we understood of having a different psychological, psychoactive effect than say even today. Today it's much more morphed. Today, they were breeding it in the labs and warehouses, so they crossbred all these different strains, trying to bring out the best expression of what the combination of those plants could bring. So oftentimes today you'll see hybrids of what originally started back in the 50s, 60s as indica sativa, now became a hybrid of both. Again, offering not only maybe for, oftentimes it's done because one plant just simply grows better, more robust. So we'll cross it with this other one that's more stony, let's say, but doesn't grow as well. It doesn't grow as robustly. So we'll cross them and see what happens. So that became its whole network of things all on its own. The breeders are a whole segment of the cannabis community, even today, that are breeding, crossbreeding, doing all these different intricate horticultural techniques in order to, again, bring out another strain altogether. The new strain altogether maybe sells better at the pot shop. True, by the way. Now it's much more commercial.
Yeah.
Well, it's always been somewhat commercial, but on a small scale level. Now it's much more commercial.
So
I hope
whenever we see different name, it means a different plant then.
Yes, 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 yes.
Okay.
Yes, both of them are they're still cannabis. They're all called cannabis sativa. They're all called cannabis something.
Mhm.
So the cannabis indica, cannabis sativa, two separate strains, but offer the same psychoactive effect.
Got it.
And cannabis too cannot really be activated unless it's heated. It has to be the term decarboxylized. So that's why the heat process, you can't just eat cannabis, it will not affect you. But if you heat it, whether through the oven making a brownie, which became popular, um, I think back in the 60s, became popular in San Francisco area was a woman, Mary Jane Rothbaum. She sort of started treating AIDS patients with her brownies. Mary Jane brownies was and
Oh
she
my
started
goodness.
treating the AIDS patients with brownies because their appetites were so depressed that the brownies helped them eat. And if you could get the AIDS patient to eat and gain weight, he could become healthy. So that became one of the first medical cannabis activists, again, from your area, Mary Jane, they called her. And that was just one. And then another one from your area, too. A lot of the cool people came from California. Uh, Dennis Perone, he was another medical cannabis activist, also patient. So this was, again, when I say on the shoulders of others I stand, it's those people who we were able to hack our way into being activists. But again, it was part activism. It was part, us learning ourselves. But basically, I find that the people in the community genuinely want to help those that are coming to seek their advice about what should I do? And then others, again, they don't need your advice. They're giving you advice. Those were the patients and the customers that would aggravate me when they're coming and trying to tell me more than I know myself. So, uh, anymore, I should say that the young kids today are much, much more versed than we were back in 2012 to 2018 or so when I got out of it. Um, Again, about the time it became full on legal, my time, no, I hold a retail license
Mhm.
that I have never opened the store, but all of us that had medical marijuana license, we all got a business license if we wanted to open a store. But the politics in the state of Washington became such where the license that I have that I could open my store is in Mossy Rock, Washington. Well, that's about a mile away from, Oregon, where in the state of Oregon, they give pot away practically. So nobody would come to our high tax state to buy pot from my store. And then by this time I had run out of steam with the whole pot business itself. It had gotten when it was unregulated and the guy that grew it would come in and we'd bag it there in the shop and smoke some of it and then go sell it. Those were kind of fun and exciting days. But then it became much more regulated where the watchful eye of the liquor control board was all over you with cameras in every shop, cameras in every grow room. There's a camera looking at what's going to happen with this pot. With I suppose, and rightfully so, we can't let this pot get into the hands of children. That was
Mm,
always the thing they
yeah.
hung their hat on. And rightfully so. We never argued with that. We never thought, oh no, we want to make sure every young prepubescent teenager in town is smoking pot. Never. We were always checking IDs. That became part of our DNA too, is make sure nobody comes into this shop unless they're at least 21 years of age. And that holds true today, I think, in California and in Washington, where they have state regulated cannabis, control board.
Yes.
Good.
So, Jake, I think you're about to get into that, but I'd be so curious to hear, even if it's anecdotal reports, how you started to kind of, I know you're not a mental health clinician, but you are very experienced with life and and obviously with the production, cultivation, and distribution of cannabis. You met so many different people. Did you start to have like you started to talk about this tendency towards suggesting if someone had nightmares, they should take
Mhm,
this one. If
mhm,
someone had
mhm.
anxiety, they should take this one. If someone had depression, they should take this one. And what would you still say about that?
Well, yes, I have to say that probably Jake the professor, who was the trusted senior that owned the shop, we had two shops here in Seattle, so we were known and we traveled and like you do in business, you go do the different functions. So we were pretty well known. I say we, my partner and myself, we have two partners. One of the partners was a female. She ran the show, by the way. I'll say that right up front. If it wasn't for her, we would have never made it. So I'll say that without a doubt. Well, we still credit her for being able to hold it together, But we I think it became apparent that people were coming to me because of what they felt was a senior that would, not somebody that it's not they didn't trust the young kids, but young kids don't know as much as an older person does, but they don't have that sense of empathy and compassion either. Their goal was to let me just get this woman some pot here. And that, and I tell you, we did everything we do to train these young people to no, this is getting serious. And they understood it too. Like, oh no, this woman, they would pride themselves, and me too, pride themselves on helping people overcome some of their whatever it was that they had a problem. And believe me, people that have problems, oftentimes, as soon as they find a trusted face, they will tell you their problems. And so I found it, again, a not a heavy burden to bear, but understood every time I spoke to someone, some people really took it to heart. So I learned a couple of lessons about not doing something. Somebody come, man, I did what you told me, and I passed out dead and cold. That was nothing that I wanted. So I learned early on, don't just jest with these people. And then oftentimes I would tell them, just take half of what's recommended. That was, pretty good advice about anything. And I learned that at a Grateful Dead show a long time ago when somebody tried to give you a hit of acid, another discussion, but don't take the whole thing. Always take half and see what happens, So I would still advise anybody, whatever treatment, less is more. And then see where it goes. Less is more. Then you can see if you can ease into it. But the last thing we wanted to do was somebody needed sleep remedy and overdose them on cannabis where they got sick and they weren't nauseous and they were feeling well. No, we needed to make sure that we were able to help them so that they'd come back in. We weren't trying to scare anybody off, especially new users. We too, at that time, were seeing many, many new users who had heard about us. Our name was the name of our company was much different than some of the other pot shops. We were Northwest Patient Resource Center, so we had someone in our name. Some of the other shops were, one was Freedom or some, cutesy little name, Mary Jane's or some kind of name that would certainly indicate. Of course, the green flag always meant that there's pot there at that corner, some kind of green cross or flag. So were already seeing, because of the name, more people that were coming in for medical advice. But sleeplessness, PTSD, alcoholism, I think I named a couple more that were, however, cancer treatment. There were 2 or 3 really, really emotional times I had with cancer patients. One in particular, a young girl, Dawn Crawford was her name, but she came in one day to our store and she confided in me, I've got cancer, and I was familiar with cancer, but I wasn't familiar with somebody I did not know that well telling me that they've got cancer. Oh yeah, they cut my breast off, and she shows me her little where she used to have breasts, showing me right there in our shop, and so that's when I began to know that and we were helping her with, she was having sleep problems, and we were helping her at the time, not so much smoking pot, but what became popular were tinctures. Tinctures are cannabis compounds that are used a couple of different ways. You can use cannabis, you can dissolve it in alcohol. It has to be heated, but alcohol tincture is a pretty effective way to get it so you don't have to smoke it. Certainly the gummies and any of the confections that you see today are all made with some sort of cannabis extraction. Cannabis extraction is either alcohol expressed or oftentimes CO2 extraction using high pressure CO2. They're big stainless steel pieces of equipment. The cannabis goes in these cylinders, and through high pressure, it squeezes out the cannabis juice, if you will, for this discussion. And it makes this goop. It's really sticky. It's super sticky, much like pine sap. I guess it would be the same sort of tackiness. It doesn't come off with, a paper towel. And this is used for your vape pens that you see today. So they took that raw cannabis, which maybe wasn't as healthy to smoke, carcinogen sort of incendiary cannabis. But what becomes popular is the vaporizing pens that you see often in vapes. You see them very discreetly used all over the place, at the bus stop, at the rock show, at the grocery store, for that matter. Probably not healthy because it's so easy to use. And now your problem has become not being able to kind of function in life without hitting that vape pen every time something kind of like sparks. Oh, I can't deal with that. I'm going to go hit my vape pen. So, you know, self care is somewhat can be, unless you're a disciplined individual, self care can also be as reckless as not doing anything about your issues themselves.
Oh, thank you so much for speaking to this. I was hoping you would get into this aspect of.
This has been my experience with it, as far as I never early on, I knew that don't ever tell somebody this is blanket for everybody. Oh, yeah, just smoke more. That never has been my advice. And I think was well received and well respected from my older peers. The young kids, they knew too I was a hip daddy, but the older people who I knew really were dependent on these advice that I was giving them. Again, I understood that it was real, real important and learned a lot along the way because I get their feedback. The next day, they're coming in and telling me about their experience.
Mhm.
Fortunately, for many people in today's environment, into the medical marijuana, all you had to buy was a little bit. All you had to buy was a $10 little gram. And I told him regularly, back in my day, you had to buy a whole ounce of pot in order to figure out what it was going to do to you. Now you can buy a little bit. If you like it, and if it's favorable, come back and get some more. If you
Hmm.
didn't like it and it's not favorable, don't do that. Try something different or don't try it at all. I've given that advice as much as anybody. Maybe this isn't for you. Maybe cannabis isn't for you at all. More so, maybe smoking cannabis isn't for you.
Mm.
Perhaps a gummy, perhaps a small micro dose is something that might benefit you. If you say sleep is your problem, again, 10 milligram is, a good place to start. And you'll find that, you can get a good night's sleep. But if you could try not to depend on that every night, you're good. So it has a tolerance to that was, another thing that becomes apparent with cannabis, like many other drugs, you need more and more. And so if you can kind of balance that in some way, if your Friday night is buying pot and spending your weekend, that's probably a healthy thing. But if every day of the week you're going to use it, perhaps for you, it's not as healthy of an option.
And how would you know, like when patients would come into the resource center, was there a way that you would kind of know if there was a dependency developing, or would you just tell you?
No, not really, because, well, it's like everything else. Everybody's allowed to do whatever you want to do. We weren't going to make a bunch of judges call that. Now, wait a minute, son, you better watch your use. We also were trying to sell pot, so that couldn't go away. And also, well, I should say, cannabis is quite benign. As far as the use of cannabis itself is very, very benign. It's not like any other, not like fentanyl or anything like related to that. And so
Sure, sure.
that was another thing we knew with assurance that you can't get too out of control. You're not going to go wreck the car over this. This is,
Yeah.
you might wake up with a cough, but you're not going to kill anybody over your cannabis use. And I think the local authorities too kind of understood that these kids aren't out robbing the bank. They're at home eating, Doritos and drinking Pepsi. This is a pretty good place. We know where they're at, if you will. So we kind of knew we were helping the community too. We knew that somehow this was beneficial, but again, we didn't know where it was going. We still
Right.
don't.
Right. With that said, Jake, just really briefly, for those that are listening that are really tend to be anxious human
Mhm,
beings, right?
mhm.
They often need to know what you just said, like, oh, cannabis is benign. But in general, what would you recommend for them when they start? Like a lower dose, and would it be more something like indica or CBD versus?
Well, certainly, indica a place to start, but
Mhm.
again, they have hybrid cannabis, but they too have hybrid mixtures, hybrid formulations, if you will, of CBD THC. So, generally speaking, a 1-to-1 ratio, and you'll find that at your local dispensary, a 1-to-1 ratio CBD THC is actually a very good mild dose without the CBD kind of counteracts the psychoactivity of the THC. So CBD plays a role as I think they call it a companion sort of element to THC. So in a measured amount, there's THC CBD 1-to-1. They also have a THC CBD ratio 1-to-10. So which is this, and even 1-to-20, which is to speak that somewhere the formulations of these particular ratio CBD THC, there's a difference in their effect. 1-to-1 is generally good for pain relief, whether it be a topical. We'll talk about topicals a little bit, which is something you rub on your skin and it's absorbed, through your skin pores, or sublingual. There's several different delivery methods that work well that you can kind of without smoking it. Again, smoking isn't for everybody. Some people, they got issues. They don't need to be smoking anything.
Yeah.
Might trigger them to smoke the nicotine they used to smoke before. Anyway, so that too was always became aware of this. So don't be advising people about things that you don't know about. And so we were careful. You would have to be careful about it because we were generally wanting to help people. So you can't help people by just, oh yeah. We too would shun any bud tenders, if you will, that we thought were too much of a rock star. That wasn't tolerated so much. You settle down. It we didn't need them being all weedy with us. We didn't like that reputation. So this is how I was dressed in a suit jacket and everything. I was owner of a business. So, and we were doing a lot of press too at that time, because legalization was becoming popular, a lot of press interviews with our local news press, or we had, a Time magazine came in, they came and did a thing, Time magazine, back when it was becoming legal. That was kind of a thrill. They got pictures of me in Time magazine. I'm like, okay, that's cool. But
You have that beautiful article of you, and I think it's the Seattle Times, is it?
yes, Seattle Times. And then it was told to me too, my partner, he was all into about going and he wanted to talk to these people and everything. But I think at the time I had hair down to here and a beard down to here. I looked like the scientist in the lab. I'm got pot plants growing all around me. I also grew the pot there too. So um, I was much more camera ready than he was. He always had this straight look about him. But for myself, so my picture was taken by a lot of news agencies. And once your picture's there out there in the World Wide Web, you're in. So you can look my name up. You'll see me in just about when it became legal at Boston, Massachusetts, they have my picture of me watering plants in Boston, Massachusetts, whatever the newspaper is there, And so that was kind of a thrill too. So I had a little bump and it was my 15 minutes, if you will. And I knew that too, but it was just a fun experience. And I knew too, I'm not only helping people, but also promoting the industry itself. And again, in unknown directions, I was doing my part, so I dressed sometimes flamboyantly, not the stoner kid, more like the distinct, well, Jake the Professor was the term and I liked it. So I kind of hung my hat on that. But yeah, I know more about it than anybody, but humbly, I do not. These young kids, they know much, much more about it. So you can trust your local bud tender if they know and they all talk amongst themselves. So if anybody's kind of seeking out some kind of thing, your reputable store down San Francisco, Harborside, which is one that's in Oakland, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It is.
Steve D'Angelo and his brother, they both were very part of that too. We also modeled ourselves after their shop down there too. They had theirs going a couple of years before we did in California. And we went down and saw, oh, this is how you do it. So very professional. And they have someone there, I'm sure, that could speak to you about your medical cannabis need, not so much your whatever else you want to talk to them about. But there's somebody there that can talk with you about what might work best for you as far as indica, sativa, or any of the things that we briefly discussed. And then, this is the day of YouTube. So
Of
if you want
course.
to know something about anything, go to YouTube. You change your oil if you want. They'll teach you anything you need to know. Don't trust everything you see on YouTube, but certainly that's a good place to get some general orientation about these different compounds I spoke of briefly.
Yeah. And so when you think back, I mean, obviously at the time you were the expert, right? Before it
Yeah.
became so
Yeah.
legal, that's why you got the title Jake the Professor.
Yeah.
And thank goodness for the World Wide Web, and we have all this wealth of information. But, for me as a trauma therapist, I live in the Bay Area.
Mhm.
Have so many clients say, "Oh, I'm gonna start using cannabis for my sleep, or I'm gonna start using cannabis for my nightmares." And there's books now, right? There's the CHI who Uva actually lives in this area. But when they go and they do talk to the bud tenders, because I can't advise them, right?
Yeah.
There does seem to be this general category, which is the same thing that happens with antidepressants, right? There's these general categories. And so sometimes it sounds like it's just experimenting, like under a general category of like which strain or type of.
Yes, exactly. And so, yes, in an uncontrolled and unregulated environment is choosing your cannabis strain. Yes. And unfortunately, not every strain is available every time you go to your store. So there might be a strain that you really, really like, and wow, this one really is one that really puts me in a place that I want to be. And then the next thing you know, you don't see that anymore because the strains themselves kind of fade in. They'll hang around a month or 2 months or maybe 6 months. And then next thing you never see it again because the breeders are always developing new strains so they can name it something new. And so there's dozens of different names of these Gorilla Glue, Blue Dream, just dozens of these flashy names that don't really tell the story. So you can look at the packaging, and all of it's been tested in most states, and I'm sure in California, it's all been tested for its potency.
Mhm.
I should say take that with a grain of salt too, because testing labs and facilities too get paid to test your cannabis at high.
Yeah.
Whatever they get paid to give it the best score they can give it. So you have to also be almost leery of the testing. Some of the things you are concerned about if you're buying retail cannabis is what are they using to spray to kill the insects? Because I don't
No.
want to smoke some sort of neurotoxin that somebody has sprayed to kill their spider mites. So it gets a little more in the woods, in the weeds, if you will, when you're talking about, is this going to be good for me? Well, let's look at the whole picture. So on the label, you'll see what its THC is. It'll show what its CBD is. Another component of that measurement is CBN. CBN is another one of those cannabinoids that's in cannabis that is really good for sleep. So CBN is one that you'll see oftentimes. You'll even see a THC, CBD, and CBN. So there's all three of those components in one. Usually it's a dose of some sort. It could be a gummy or a candy or chocolate is real popular. Um, the problem with the edibles sometimes is some of them taste pretty good. So, if one or two is a recommended dose, don't eat a whole bag of whatever it is. But even
Totally.
if you do, you can't necessarily overdose on it. I'll say that. There's no, by the time you can't really overdose on cannabis. You'll just fall asleep and be maybe ill or maybe, nauseous if you eat too much, if you're not acclimated. So, I mean, yeah.
That brings me to another point of because, now that I'm trained as a psychedelic therapist, I hear all these stories, and I have for years as a trauma therapist, the people that have been referred to me because they had a traumatic experience taking psychedelics. I will say that cannabis is the only psychoactive substance I have heard of where no one's actually had a traumatic experience. However, that being said, certainly before it was legal, there's tons of stories of the pot brownie and having to be rushed to the emergency room because a person thought they were having a panic attack and then when the emergency room doctors were kind of laughing at them and realizing they just had too much pot, and so anyways, I was just wondering about that now that it's legal.
Well, yes. Well,
Yeah.
actually, you bring up a good point because I don't know what college student hasn't eaten a brownie at that thing and wish they hadn't. You do not even remember what happened that night generally because again, unregulated, unmeasured doses, formulations of some cannabis brownie that some kid in college made is not necessarily your best test. So I say cautiously, if you've had a bad experience with eating cannabis, you probably ate too much. Simply said, you probably ate too much. And so it's benign enough. But if you do eat too much, you'll know it. And generally, it's an unpleasant experience. I think most of the time, people I knew that ate unregulated in college or whatever in high school, it was an unpleasant experience. You didn't remember what happened.
Yeah.
So too much is too much. That goes with anything. Too much is too much. And I said too, I had I had some psychedelic experiences too back in my youth. And I followed the Grateful Dead and certainly I've seen doses of LSD and things like another discussion, by the way. But again, another lesson in too much is too much. So I've had two markedly bad LSD experiences in my life. Not terrible, but demons were chasing me, for real. Things that I could not control and so I didn't like that. So I even knew too back then as far don't do too much anything. And those are lessons I learned myself. In fact, we used ketamine. I'll tell you about those experiences too, if you'd like. When we were young, 1982, we were using ketamine, but back then it was called flake. And it was something that was mixed with mint leaves and you smoked it. And it was sold in a little black gray film canister that 35 millimeter film used to be sold in. And you would buy a little can of flake. And flake you did much like a bong. You had a small little measured amount.
Oh,
And that was the only experience I had with ketamine. It was quite popular for a while, but then it goes away and nobody ever sees that drug again. But I've tried all those things. I didn't find that I didn't find any of those drugs were anything that I needed to do regularly and still don't today. But I still will use cannabis today. But I don't know if it's for medicinal or perhaps even of a habit. But I find I can keep a balance, using cannabis when I feel like it. But we can talk about those other things another time.
I was just gonna say, if you want, we do have a few minutes if you would like to talk about your bad trips with LSD or ketamine, or if you'd rather save it for another podcast interview, we can do that
Well,
too.
I mean, just briefly, anytime you're messing with psychedelics, things that are going to alter you to that degree, it, it probably is wise to be under some sort of supervision. It could be at a big ayahuasca meet where the sensei is there and he's helping you too. It can be that environment if that's what is popular. But then oftentimes I just think especially unregulated, don't take something from a guy at a Dead concert and he says, here, try this. Don't do that.
Yeah.
And that's just best advice for I'd advise that to myself and I advise it to any person. Don't do that. Too popular is nitrous. I recently went to see Billy Strings. It's a bluegrass country, psychedelic bluegrass country guy, but popular at the Billy Strings show are nitrous balloons. Nitrous oxide is what they sell, what the dentist gives you to knock you out when you have your tooth pulled. So to talk of its effectiveness, it's quite narcotic, but nitrous balloons are very popular. And I saw a bunch of people holding and walking around with their big old nitrous balloon, taking hits out of it. And this too is very psychoactive and they're having fun and they're partying with this and it's totally fine. I've done nitrous oxide myself. Best if the dentist is probably administering it to you. I think there's probably nitrous is very easy to get to. Nitrous oxide, you can order a case of it from Amazon. You get a whole case for $100 and something of 150 cartridges. Nitrous oxide is what they use to make whipped cream at the restaurants. Fancy restaurants they put the cream in this little dispenser thing and they put nitrous oxide in there. And that's how it makes whipped cream to cream up. So they'll use these little cartridges that are much like a little CO2 cartridge, but with nitrous oxide. And that's a popular thing that, some people use for their recreation, but not advised. What's not advised is using industrial grade nitrous oxide would not be advised over medical grade nitrous oxide. So the purity of something too has a lot to do. Purity of the cannabis you're smoking, the purity of whatever it is that you are ingesting has everything to do with what experience you might have. But with nitrous oxide specifically, it's so cheap and so easy for kids to get. Mail it to you at Amazon and you're up all weekends, huffing gas that's probably not good for you.
Well,
Not
that's just it. So how does the reader or the viewer know what's pure? And I would imagine that's just by you get it from an established medical or
that I suppose yes, yes. I mean, if your safety is your concern and you want to have some sort of education along the way, yes, that. But I don't know anybody other than a dentist that administers. Or maybe when you go get your colonoscopy, I think they would use nitrous. So that's a rough way to go if you're looking for treatment. Don't do that.
but purity of any substance, not just nitrous oxide, the purity of
Well, well, then yes, yes, yeah. That would be the boost that you're talking about. Yes, yes, for sure. The purity of anything that you're ingesting means everything about your well-being and your overall longevity in life for that matter. So the better you are to yourself, the longer you'll live, more happily. I think so, and that's kind of the trick. I think that's what everybody somewhat deals with their own, I call them demons, but everybody deals with their issues. And so some people overdo it. Some people don't deal with it at all, but that results in them sitting at the bar next to some guy named Joe every night, drinking until 2 o'clock so they can get to sleep at night.
yeah.
We know that alcohol is not necessarily a good sleep aid. So I would advise that all the time. I need some sleep. I drink a 6-pack a night just to get to sleep. Well, you're using the wrong thing. This is not your best, thing for sleep. If you drink enough, you will pass out, but that's not sleep. And so those were discussions we would have with, a lot of people because what they wanted was just to rest their mind. and that was,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
that's what we all want. So that was an easy discussion to have because that's what we all want. There was a common ground immediately with somebody who just wants to rest and say, okay, let's, talk about what we might do. But having them confide in me about such things, it was a good experience for me. I mean, it drew the best out of me. I can say that. And I don't think I won't be, I wouldn't have had that same experience, but I will say on the tugboat, I worked on the tugboat for, I don't know, 18 years or something. And on the tugboat, I think too, part of my nature on the tugboat, they called me the Reverend because I was always the good guy that had good advice about whatever. People had wild problems with their wives at home or anything like. I was a good listener to
Yeah.
hear somebody tell me about, and I found that translated well when I got into the cannabis industry. And I'm working with people that skill set really came in handy for me. It's not everybody, but I'm able to talk with most people about most things, I think, most
Right.
of the time. There's some I don't want to talk to. But yeah, all in all.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is a point to just share with the viewers, like, how long we've known each other
Uh-huh.
and the iterations of you, right? Because I've known you now for 30 years. I think it's been 29.
30 plus, yes.
And when I first met you, you were more the reverend, right? Like you
Yes. Yes.
and I would defer to you too for life advice.
Yes. We shared a lot back then.
You shared a lot. And so we've been through different iterations with each other too. So for me, knowing you as the reverend, and also you having this passion to want to heal others and heal humanity as well. When I found out, because we were out of touch for a few years there,
Yeah.
when I found out that you started this resource, this cannabis medical dispensary resource center, I can't tell you the joy I felt in my soul
I found my niche.
knowing it was you. Like this was your niche, and you were
I
gonna
found my
help
niche.
so many people.
Well, it's good because I needed that. That's what we need, and it'd be good if others felt the same. If you can give of yourself, you'll find that you'll receive it back almost immediately. So the joy I would get from nurturing others only came back on me much more profoundly. It's almost I wasn't doing it for them. I'm doing it for me, and I think probably that's what drives you as well.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
and if it doesn't, then you need to find another job, because you have to be able to want to really genuinely help people. And once people sense that you are there for them, then they are, then you can guide them and direct them. And then they're on their way. They can guide and direct themselves. You only need to be there in the beginning to kind of push them along. And then they can figure out their own things. I suppose that's your industry as well.
Absolutely.
I'm only hoping that everybody you see doesn't have to compete. They come back to you time after time after time. Then no, you need to learn the skills. Learn what you need to know about whatever it is, and then you're on your own. You're able to teach others. How about that?
Exactly. And that's exactly my passion as a mental health clinician in the world is let's get people graduated from therapy, not keep them in therapy for years. And yeah, and this is why the integration with the psychedelics is really, really useful because I believe it helps people find who they really are in the world.
It does. Well, and so meeting you 30 something, I think 32 years ago or so, I am surprised that you are in this. That you have always been straight. Not, I don't mean straight in that kind of way, but very sober. You've always, and you and your brother too, for that matter, just sober-minded people. Not the hacksters, and you've always been that way. And I knew back then that you had worked. I think only thing I understood and remembered was that you worked maybe with trauma, young ladies that had some sort of big trauma, some kind of epic trauma event. And that always seemed, back then I couldn't understand how are you able to come home and remove yourself from what you've been listening to all day. And now you come home and you're relaxing. I think we both live next door to one another in an apartment building over here overlooking the Puget Sound. And,
Yeah.
a whole bunch of us would gang up every evening, kind of looking over the balcony and reminisce. And I always kind of wondered, well, how is it that Karen is able to, sort of decompress after listening to some really horrific stories on them? And you never shared them with me because, believe me, it's nothing anybody wants to hear about.
Sure,
A lot of
exactly.
stories that I didn't want to know, and still don't want to hear about those. But I knew that was your life commitment. So I was surprised that you got into psychoactivism because I was running off to the gorge doing, dead shows and, experimenting with any psycho. not too much too extreme. I had mother and father. They were expecting me to behave myself. So I never got too carried away with any of my shenanigans, but I never was afraid to take a strip LSD at at a dead show or something, experience that whole thing in that environment. It's kind of fun and healthy. Some of the most memorable times I had, I will say probably I learned a lot more having experienced those. I had two bad LSD trips. One just took too much, just took too much. And things were closing in on me. Somehow there was some weirdo people hanging around, and somehow they all became demons or demonic or somehow in my twisted mind. And, with heavy dose LSD, you really are in another world. You're in a totally other altered world. Things are, graphic. Things are not look very cartoony, like you're in the middle of a cartoon. So colors and everything are very distorted. It's not pleasant unless you want it to be. If you're maybe at the Sphere and you're listening to the Grateful Dead and all that big light thing, maybe it's pleasant. That would be too much. But so that was a bad experience. And I don't think I did LSD for a long time after that. And then another time when I was much younger, it was another time where I don't know if I took too much or I think I must have, but just the situation hit me wrong. And
Mhm.
I just, it just, it blew up in me much more than it was. I was knocking on the local church door at 3 o'clock in the morning, wanting the pastor. And of course, the pastor wasn't there. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, but I just wanted Jesus to save me. And so here I am. Jesus must have saved me because I'm still here. But I would know better than to advise anybody to take strong psychoactive drugs. I think that's an individual experience for everybody. But, I think it's cautiously know what you're getting into. Probably much more suited for a younger man than it is an older man, I suppose. The treatments you're doing are much different. I've done some studies on what you're doing as far as now. So what's Karen up to? For myself, I don't know if I would do a ketamine treatment myself. I don't know. I've learned some of those lessons. And then so I don't know if I would gain it, but maybe I would. Somebody go, oh, well, yeah, you don't even know what you wouldn't know. Well, I can assure you, yes, I don't know what I should know, but I don't know if it would be for me necessarily, but I certainly encourage anybody that's looking for those type of, I want to call them alternative treatments because I guess maybe they're considered that.
Yeah.
um, I would encourage anybody to cautiously look into and go to a trusted clinician to, get some real advice. And you'll know if you have a trusted clinician what their motives are.
Exactly.
Be sensitive to who's guiding you along here. If it's a commercial on TV, I'd be real, real cautious of that commercial on TV that wants to help me. I don't trust. And of course, these are sensitive times. I think it's a good time for all of us to be sensitive about where we're getting our information and
Yeah.
who we're getting our information from. And is that information really sound? So the blessing of it all is we're a keystroke away of finding out just about anything we want to know. If we dig in a little bit, you can find out a lot about what you might expect out of a psychoactive experience, what you might expect from using cannabis, what you might expect from using MDMA. I mean, they're using MDMA for, PST relief. And I think there are several anecdotal studies, scientific studies using MDMA. Back to one of the things we spoke of briefly, and I think introduced, I maybe drifted off, was the thing that for sleep disorder, PTSD, one of the reasons that it's so popular is that with PTSD, it suppresses your dreams. And so this is true. If you use cannabis regularly, your dreams, you will not remember your dreams. And that happens with me routinely. And
Mhm.
so I never, until I quit maybe for a week or so sometimes just to sort of, I just maybe lose interest or whatever. And then your dreams will come back. So in the treatment of PTSD, some people are woken up with night tremors and terror.
That's right. Yes.
And so that's one of the things that I think I read about, that there studies have shown that cannabis use can help with PTSD.
Yes.
The, the flip side of that,
Mhm.
maybe it's not going to help you at all. That's the problem when you're looking and seeking a different treatment for your whatever issues I call them.
Yeah.
I almost don't like to call them trouble, I have problems. I like to call them issues that we can resolve. But not everything is for everybody. So if you're, seeking for, some kind of mental health issues, you can't just trust every little thing that comes along or every little article that comes along either. You need to, well, first of all, it starts with you. Do you want the help? If you
Yes.
want the help, and you're willing to do a little bit of work, then somebody out there will help you. That's just how the world works. There's always some connection for somebody that's genuinely wanting to help. I don't know how it works. I can't even get into that, but there's some kind of karma thing or something going on. The bright light will lead you to the help that you need if you're truly seeking and you are persistent, all those lessons that we learn in life, then you'll find somebody that can maybe guide you to a better state of being. And I think that's real important. So again, the work that you do is invaluable to some, and so that's a good thing, right? And it helps us sleep better at night too when we know that we've help somebody. And you have to do it in kind of a humble way. I didn't even realize your credentials were what they were. Like, well, she didn't tell me all that. So, on behalf of myself and everybody else you helped, good. I'm glad you did the work because we really, really need you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So,
and ditto to you. That's exactly how I felt when I came back from I think it was back from Thailand when I
yes,
learned that you had started this
yes,
center. And I was like, oh my God, this is so perfect for Jake. Absolutely so perfect. And everyone whose lives he's going to touch. And that's why I wanted you on this podcast today.
I'm so glad. I'm really relieved. I'm glad because I felt like I had something to share, but I was so glad to be back being able to advise somebody about something that I know. But I guess the biggest takeaway for myself is if you think it's something that going to work for you, but don't hang your hat on every little thing and don't be afraid to try something different. If it's for me, if it's another strain, let's try that. If it's another CBD THC combination, let's try that. If it's ketamine treatment, let's try that. So you can't be afraid to step out there a little bit and maybe even step out of your own comfort zone.
Yes.
And if you do that, then you might find that you can now meet yourself where that problem lies. And I'm not even a trained clinician. And these are some things that I just know from being 67 years old. It's like, yeah, generally speaking, if you were persistent, it'll all come together, but maybe not in the time that you want it to. And that is the inherent problem with life. Everybody wants things when they want it. And so you got to do the work. So if you do the work, it'll get done, just like everything.
So wise, Jake. I can't say I saw we should end on that. I mean, that is perfect. So to wrap up, it sounds
I'm happy to come back anytime, Karen, to talk with you about any of these kind of things. And I'm cheering you on. I'm your biggest fan, and so I was anxious to come aboard and just see whatever it is that you thought you could draw at me. Which surprised me once I started. Like, well, I got to get ready for this and find. I started going back through, some of these different things that I was with, but it was it's been and it is a rewarding life, but it's been a rewarding career in the cannabis world. But I'm glad I'm away from it. It's like it's a young man's game, and I'm glad I'm away from it. So, I'm going to enjoy my little retirement years. I've got my new little puppies and got a lovely wife, and so we're living our best. But everything's great here. I'll never admit to anybody that it's not great. I can tell you that. I've learned enough about life. You'll never hear me say that. Oh no, I've got problems because I don't have any problems. I say that in jest, but not compared to others that I know. I can look at people with problems. So I know that I'm in a better spot, and probably you are too, than most. And I'm saying you, not you, but your viewers are in a better spot than some. So look around and assess it and move along. I guess.
well, if anyone's listening right now, right, they obviously have a growth mindset and they're wanting to learn and grow. And in my opinion, anyone that has that growth mindset is doing better than the folks in the world that do not have a growth mindset.
Oh, absolutely. If you're on the road, then you're just where you need to be. If you're on the road, if you're on the path, you'll find what you're looking for at the end of the path. But if you're not on the path, well, you'll wander around until you get to a point that don't let your misery eat up your life. You only have so many breaths. You only have so many days. And when you're young, everything seems like it takes forever. As we get older, things don't take forever. Things happen next week, next month. Next Monday's trash day again. So, it's like I'm saying that it becomes very quick. And so, don't live it miserable. Try to get it together in a real sincere way. Whatever that was that brings you joy, find something that brings you joy and do it. If it doesn't bring you joy, think about how you're going to expel that, because that's something that maybe you don't need in your life, whatever that might be. Anyway.
Beautiful, Jake. So well said. So with that, I definitely want to offer for you to come back again in the future because there's so much more wisdom to share.
I'm here for you, my dear.
Thank you. But for today, we'll wrap it up. And I want all the viewers to know, again, if they want to get in touch with you, is there a way they can, like, how
Oh,
on
Instagram.
Instagram?
Instagram, I suppose, Jake the Professor would be one way that maybe you get in touch with my alter ego. But, I'm going to leave that to the professionals. But again, if somebody has any special need, yes, I'll certainly be able to talk to them, give them my number. I'll help them as the best I can, But Jake the Professor Instagram, it's a stale page, but it's got some of my old antics that you'll see that this was part of our ushering in the new industry more so than medical cannabis. But it was a fun experiment. And now that it's here, I should say cannabis sales have dropped in the last 4 years substantially. The cannabis sales in Washington State and in Colorado are down. And basically, young kids don't want to, young kids aren't being introduced to that. Young kids don't care about smoking pot. Their daddy smoked pot. Who wants to do what their daddy did? Not very many. So cannabis sales are down. It's not becoming more popular. What they feared, every high school kid in town was going to start smoking pot. No, no, no. Cannabis sales are down. And it may not, the industry itself may not even last. And then, of course, the new administration is talking about, descheduling or rescheduling cannabis.
Yes.
That's terrible. It's the worst thing that we want in the industry. It's the worst thing we want because regulated cannabis that's scheduled, that comes from the pharmacists. Pharmacists are the only ones that can prescribe drugs. And so if their little scheme of becoming a scheduled drug allows only pharmacists to dispense it, that puts your pot shops owner right out of business unless they've got the pharmacist on staff at $150,000 a year that they can't afford to dispense the cannabis. So these are just some of the current battles that the cannabis industry itself is fighting. So the war on drugs is not over at all. It's really just going to reemerge here soon with this new rescheduled Schedule 2 marijuana that's now prescribed by your pharmacist. You will not find pharmacists that are going to be prescribing cannabis. It's too.
Oh, interesting.
I know. So that's the latest in the cannabis world. Where's it going? Currently, it's looking not good. So descheduling altogether, no schedule on it, just like you would oregano. There's no scheduling on oregano. No scheduling at all is probably the only thing that's going to save the cannabis industry that we know today.
So descheduling versus rescheduling.
Yes.
And is decriminalization a thing for cannabis too? I know it is for psilocybin. Is there such a
in some states? Well, in some states, very tolerant. Bottom line is law enforcement has no time for some kid that smoked a pot in the back of school. They don't have, they do for hardcore drug import export stuff. And some of that RICO stuff where they're transporting big heavyweight from one state to another that they're concerned with, but law enforcement doesn't care about pot use anymore. They could care less. They do care about fentanyl use downtown, in your town and in mine too. They care about it. Basically, the whole time we could have been smoking pot on the street corner. My whole life, we hiding behind the school to hide away from cops when we could have been camped out on Main Street and smoked it anyway. But that's another discussion. We'll bring it up next time. Anyway.
Any last words of wisdom you want to share with the viewers that are listening?
No, seek out a professional, seek out advice from those you can trust. You'll know if you can trust them, and don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone a little bit to find the treatment that you're going to need. But nobody deserves to go through life unhappy. You have, find your joy, whatever that is, find your joy. Go down, get a puppy. whatever you need to do to find your joy, but don't live through life miserable because you can't figure it out. Neither can the rest of us. We're just all doing the best we can, but hold it together, hold it together, draw your strength from those sources that bring you strength and disregard those things. If it's a bad relationship, get rid of it. If it's a bad job, think of something different, do something different, but you won't be the only one that has these challenges.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yes. Anyway, that's my words of advice.
I love it. That's spoken from the old Reverend Jake.
Yeah, the old Reverend.
Jake the Professor.
Yeah, giving you my best, my dear. Give my best to your family as well, and certainly anything that I can do, I'm here at your service, madam. And
my family gives their love to you as well.
I'll call your brother today too. Tell him to listen to our podcast.
That would be great.
Thank you for listening to Trauma, Psychedelics, and Buddhism with Karen Sprinkle. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. To learn more or to grab your copy of The Thriving Self, visit KarenSprinkle.com. Karen and this podcast do not endorse or encourage the illegal use of psychedelics.